You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
Picture this. We live longer, healthier lives surrounded by technology our ancestors would have called magic. But here's the puzzle: mental illness rates are soaring. Why, in a world of comfort and abundance, does the mind seem more fragile than ever? You might look at your smartphone, a marvel of miniaturized engineering, and wonder, shouldn't this make us happier? Why do anxiety disorders and depression spike while our basic needs are met? The technical terms, here paradox of progress, and psychosocial stressors capture this contradiction. On the surface, our societies are safer and wealthier. Underneath, invisible pressures gnaw at our well-being. Let me tell you a story. A friend of mine, thriving in her tech job, confessed she felt emptier with every promotion. More money, but less meaning. That's the paradox we're unpacking today. So, as we unravel the links between modern life and mental health, ask yourself, is the price of progress a restless mind? Let's dial back to the 19th century, a time of steam engines and revolutions. Something strange happened. Cases of what we now call schizophrenia exploded. Historians and psychiatrists noticed a spike so dramatic it couldn't just be better diagnosis. Was modernity itself urbanization, industrial noise, sensory overload fueling this epidemic? Two clinical terms to know: incidence, how often something occurs, and diagnostic criteria, the rules for defining illness. Changing social norms shifted what counted as madness. Now, you might be thinking, were people always this unwell, just hidden from view? Maybe. But evidence suggests the modern world's complexity triggers new forms of psychic distress. The 19th century wasn't just about factories and progress. It was also the dawn of a new, troubled inner world, one still with us today. If you ask someone in the West what matters most, odds are they'll say, being true to myself. Individualism is our cultural heartbeat, but is it helping or hurting us? Think of subjectivism, the belief that personal perception trumps objective truth, and relativism, the idea that values are negotiable, not fixed. Both are buzzwords of our era. Here's the setup. We're told to chase our dreams, define our own paths. The conflict? Too much self-focus can leave us isolated, anxious, unsure of where we fit. Now, you might be asking, isn't self-knowledge a good thing? Absolutely. But when society demands we conquer our inner lives alone, the burden can become crushing. So, is the modern cult of the individual a recipe for freedom or a silent invitation to loneliness? Let's zoom in on the machinery of modern life, bureaucracy and rationalization. We swim in paperwork, algorithms, and endless choices. These rational structures are meant to simplify, but do they actually overwhelm us? Ever heard of cognitive load? That's the mental effort required to process information. Add social adaptation, our need to fit shifting societal expectations, and you've got a recipe for stress. Now, imagine standing at a crossroads, bombarded by instructions, forms, and digital notifications. The setup: more choice, more control. The conflict: decision paralysis, and a constant sense of falling short. Why am I so tired, even after a day of clicking buttons? You might wonder. That's cognitive overload creeping in. The resolution? We need strategies for managing complexity, because our minds weren't built for bureaucratic labyrinths. Now we hit a controversial crossroads. Is mental illness always a disease, or sometimes a metaphor? Psychiatrist Thomas Szasz threw a grenade into the debate with his book, The Myth of Mental Illness. He argued that terms like schizophrenia are used to medicalize behaviors society finds disturbing. Szasz's technical terms, psychosocial norms, and diagnostic labeling are crucial here. His famous quip, "If you talk to God, you're praying. If God talks to you, you have schizophrenia." What a line. It forces us to ask, where do we draw the line between deviance and disease? Now you might say, but people suffer, shouldn't we help them? Of course, but Szasz warns us not to confuse society's discomfort with actual pathology. So, when we confront mental illness, are we healing minds or just enforcing conformity? Imagine standing on a cliff, staring into the void, free to choose, but terrified to leap. That's existential freedom, and it's not always liberating. Jean-Paul Sartre called it being condemned to be free. We shoulder responsibility for our choices with no authority to hide behind. Existential vacuum and analysis paralysis are the technical terms here. Kierkegaard warned about two traps: getting lost in infinite possibilities or dissolving into the crowd's routine. Either way, despair lurks. You might ask, can't I just follow the script? Sure, but sooner or later, the why of existence comes knocking. Camus called this the clash between our search for meaning and the universe's indifference. The resolution? We must wrestle with freedom, not flee it. Meaning isn't handed to use, it's forged in the struggle. Let's talk about a seismic shift: the death of God. Nietzsche's thunderbolt was more than a religious statement, it was a cultural earthquake. In the Age of Enlightenment, reason dethroned faith. The technical terms here, secularization and existential crisis, define our dilemma. Without a divine order, the search for meaning becomes a personal quest. Nietzsche warned, this tremendous event is still on its way. For many, the loss of cosmic purpose led to a sense of drift, even despair. Now you might wonder, if there's no higher plan, what's the point? That's the modern conundrum: meaning must be made, not received. In this crisis, we're forced to invent our own values, or risk being swept away by nihilism. The question echoes, can you find meaning when the old maps are gone? Enter Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and wrote Man's Search for Meaning. His insight? At the root of modern malaise is the existential vacuuma, haunting emptiness where purpose used to be. Frankl coined mass neurosis, a collective suffering caused by lack of meaning. He saw depression, aggression, even addiction as symptoms of this crisis, not just chemical imbalances. Let me tell you a story. Frankl met countless prisoners who survived unthinkable conditions because they clung to a sense of why, family, faith, a future goal. When meaning died, so did hope. You might be thinking, isn't meaning just a luxury? Frankl says no, it's our deepest need, more vital than food or shelter. His resolution: to heal, we must answer life's question, not just ask it. Meaning isn't a bonus, it's the bedrock of resilience. Every culture tells the story of a hero, someone who plunges into darkness, faces monsters, and returns transformed. Why does this myth matter to mental health? Carl Jung and Joseph Henderson saw the hero archetype as a blueprint for personal growth. Two technical terms: archetype, a universal symbol, and individuation, the process of becoming oneself. Here's the setup. We all begin dependent, shielded. The conflict? At some point, we must leave the comfort zone, confront our dragon's fear, trauma, self-doubt, and find our strength. Now, imagine your own life as a hero's journey. What's your dragon? Who are your helpers? The path isn't linear, and it's never easy. Resolution comes when we return not just healed, but able to help others. The hero myth isn't ancient history, it's our unfinished story. Imagine living in a tribe where your role matters and your absence is felt. Now contrast that with modern city life, crowded, yet anonymous. Why do we feel so alone amid the masses? Sebastian Junger's Tribe explores how human beings evolve for group belonging. Here are two terms: social cohesion, the glue that binds us, and evolutionary mismatch, the gap between our genes and our environment. Let me tell you a story. During colonial times, settlers captured by Native American tribes often refused to return to modern society. The tribe's bonds felt richer, more meaningful. Now you might say, but aren't we freer today? In some ways, yes. But modern independence comes at a price: alienation, rootlessness, a hunger for belonging. Maybe we need to rebuild the lost tribe not by abandoning progress, but by rediscovering community. Carl Jung saw modern man as torn into a rational mind cut off from ancient instincts. He called it a schizophrenia of civilization. Technical terms: dissociation, a split in consciousness, and collective unconscious, the shared psychic heritage we all carry. Jung argued our rationalism has severed us from deeper sources of meaning. Let me share a case. Jung's patient, a young woman traumatized by abuse, retreated into a fantasy world on the moon. Her real suffering wasn't madness, but alienation from humanity. You might wonder, are we all at risk of psychic split? In a way, yes. When we deny our inner world, we lose both meaning and balance. Jung's solution: we must reconnect with our unconscious, explore our dreams, and rediscover the symbols that give life depth. Modernity needs a bridge back to the soul. So, where does all this leave us? Scientific progress, individualism, and technology have redefined our world, but they've also fractured our inner lives. The path forward isn't to reject modernity, but to integrate its gifts with our ancient needs. 2 closing concepts: self-reflection, honest inner inquiry, and meaning, making the art of building purpose from chaos. Let me ask you, what rituals or communities anchor your life? What stories help you weather adversity? Healing the modern mind starts with small acts of reconnection. You might be thinking, is it really that simple? It's not easy, but it is possible. Each of us can become the hero in our own story, reuniting the fragmented self and forging meaning in an uncertain age. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this resonated, share it with someone who might need it. Let's keep the conversation and the search for meaning alive.